Hey, welcome to the Two Hasbro's Toy Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Gio, and joining me all the way from the corner of First and First, my good friend, George. How you doing, George?
Doing good.
How's everything over there at the nexus of the universe?
It's weird.
We got a special episode for you guys today. We're doing something a little different, something fun. Something I think you guys will all enjoy. We're taking a trip down memory lane. We're going to be talking about the history of action figures. Yes, you heard right. The history of action figures. I've gone ahead and poured myself a nice little cup of wine. We've turned the time circuits on. Flux capacitor is running. And George, as you know, where we're going, we don't need roads. We start off by telling everybody who we have to thank for this hobby that we love so much.
Apparently Barbie we have to thank. Or more specifically, Barbie's creator, whose name is Ruth Handler.
She's still alive?
No, she died in I think early 2000s, I think. She and her husband were the ones that started the Mattel toy company. And they went on a trip to Europe. And in Europe, well, she had already been wanting, those paper dolls that you can dress up?
Yes.
She had apparently had already been wanting a 3D version of that for her daughter to have. Because apparently she thought there were already enough boy toys and enough toys for boys, but not, enough options for girls. And she wanted a 3D doll that you could dress up with clothes. And you know what? I've learned from looking into this stuff that the history of toys, it's all just ripping each other off. It's all just copying what everyone else is doing already. And stealing ideas.
That's how the world came up with some of its best ideas. I wouldn't so much call it stealing, but you get inspiration maybe from an idea that's already out there, and you add to it, you build upon it, and eventually we end up getting better products or better results.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that. It'd be fine if it was just that, getting ideas from someone. I mean, that's fine. But they do keep enforcing. They do then enforce copyright law. Then they try to take toy lines down just because they're making too much money. Mm-hmm. Like if your competitor is making too much money and you're Mattel, you're gonna try to take them down. Like if they're eating into your profits, and vice versa too. That happened to them. They do it to everyone. It's all just a bunch of fucking. So if somebody is mad, that they swapped a figure or something. Dude, these people are like the biggest thieves already. So
don't feel so bad.
Have you heard of that saying in Spanish?
Which one?
Translates to, well, it rhymes in Spanish, so it sounds nicer, but if you steal from a thief, you deserve 100 years of pardon.
I have not. What's the saying in Spanish?
It's ladrón que roba ladrón merece 100 años de perdón.
I love it. That should be a T-shirt, an exclusive Two Hasbro's Toy Hunt T-shirt.
So Ruth Handler, the wife owner of Mattel, the creator of Barbie, she's touring Europe, or specifically Switzerland, and she comes upon a doll called Build Lily, and she's like, well, this is what I want to make, right? And she buys a whole bunch of them and brings them back, and they basically rip off that doll. The Barbie, like if I showed you a Build Lily and I showed you the first Barbie, you won't be able to tell me which is which. Which one's Barbie and which one's the Build Lily.
Oh, wow.
That's how close they were. The face looks almost exactly the same.
Wow.
And the Build Lily doll was originally marketed as a gag gift. 'Cause do you know what who Build Lily was?
No. This is the first time I ever hear that.
Uh, it was originally like a gag gift, like something you'd find at Spencer's or something, like a sex gag gift.
Wow.
'Cause Build Lily it's called Build Lily because Bild Zeitung was a newspaper, a German like tabloid that published amongst it a comic of of a of an escort named Lily, and this doll was based on Lily.
Mm.
But but in Europe it did eventually become popular with kids. But it originally started off as that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then she brought him back. She made Barbie. Tried to sell it. Do you know where it premiered? Where Barbie premiered? Where they first tried selling it?
I
To
do
people?
not.
In New York Toy Fair.
Mm.
Apparently that Toy Fair has been going on for over 100 years now.
What?
Yes.
Wow.
And apparently they didn't have much success when they because that's a show like where retailers go and buy stuff. They didn't have much success, but the retailers they did sell it to, they couldn't keep up with demand.
Wow. So it must have been super successful.
Yeah. In its like first year, it pretty much caught up to all of Build Lily's sales. That Build Lily ever had.
Worldwide?
Yeah. Well, I think they only sold it in Europe, but
Barbie was a success all over the world.
I'm not sure if in its first year it was, but apparently, well, yeah, eventually Barbie made its way back to Europe, and they tried to sell. Sorry. The Build Lily makers tried to sue Barbie for having ripped off Barbie. I'm sorry for having ripped off the Build Lily.
Wow. I bet they didn't have much success.
I think. Damn, I forgot what. I think it might have been settled out of court, but then eventually Mattel bought up all the rights to Build Lily.
Damn right.
They bought them out.
If you can't beat them, buy them.
It reminds me of the McDonald's guy that then bought out when he bought out the original McDonald's.
Greatest movie of all time.
So yeah. So now they own the Build Lily trademark, and now Build Lily can't sue them because they are them. And so this success of Barbie, a doll that you can like switch clothes and like has a bunch of accessories and stuff. Other companies,
Manufacturers?
Other people. What was the guy's name you said?
Okay, so from what I'm getting is that her popularity as a girl's doll with interchangeable clothing was so big that manufacturers were trying left and right to come up with something that they could market towards boys.
Yeah.
And this is where our good friend Stan Weston comes in, right, in the early 1960s.
Yeah. He goes to he tries to pitch Hasbro basically a Barbie doll for boys. And it ends up being G.I. Joe.
But Hasbro passed on the idea at first. Luckily for him, Don Levine happened to be at that meeting.
Don Levine was already a Hasbro worker, right?
Yes, he was already there. He was at the meeting. He liked what he heard. His boss not so much. So then I forgot if his boss went on vacation or something like that, and he went and bought an artist mannequin, and he went to a what's it called?
Oh, to some kind of military base.
Yes, but I think that came afterwards. What I know is he bought up this artist mannequin
Uh-huh.
and he pitched it to his boss about a boy's doll that you can dress in different clothing. But he then coined the term action figure in 1964. He coined the term to separate, the boys' dolls from the girls' dolls because I don't know. I guess the word doll was
They didn't
probably
want to
thought of.
call it a fashion doll for boys.
Yes, exactly. It's just a sign of the times.
Uh-huh.
Well, before this, in 1963, when Weston, before Don Levine coined the term action figure, Weston sold the idea to Hasbro at Toy Fair. Look at that, came back to Toy Fair, full circle for $100,000. He had two choices. I believe you remember what the choices were.
Yeah, it was either $50,000 and 1% royalties, or the 100,000 and no royalties.
And he took the $100,000 and no royalties. How much money do you think he ended up losing?
I don't know. I was watching the an interview with his son, the one on the Toys That Made Us, and apparently he estimated somewhere around 30 to 40 million he lost on.
That's wow. It is the McDonald's story, isn't it?
It's all of this is, dude.
Wow. I'm telling you, history repeats itself. Now these early GI Joe figures, action figures, because they were articulated, they stood 12 inches tall, and also, as we stated, they had the interchangeable clothes, and they came in 4 different styles. Uh, Back then, little boys, they weren't looking up to Batman or Superman, which were popular, but at the time, the real heroes were the boys in action, were our armed forces. So you had the option styles of Action Marine, which is obviously, for the U.S. Marines. You had the Action Pilot, which was for the Air Force. Action Soldier, which is for the U.S. Army. And the Action Sailor for the U.S. Navy. Now, for the time, G.I. Joe, they set the standard for 12-inch figures. So much so that Hasbro, in a move to create popularity for this kind of toy, licensed their product to other companies in Japan and in the UK. And these licenses had a combination of uniform and accessories that were identical to the ones manufactured here in the United States, but they also had some sets that were unique to their local markets. You were telling me an interesting one from Japan.
Oh yeah, well, one in Japan, they basically copied the GI Joe body, but they made it with clear plastic and put lights inside. And I think they called it like some kind of cyborg, some kind of android robot.
Those Japanese and their robots, huh? I guess it's always been popular over there. Now, as you were saying, once other toy companies start seeing the success a company is having, they try to mimic it. So in 1965, Rasco Industries introduced a toy by the name of Johnny Hero, which is supposed to be selling for Sears. Do you remember the store Sears before they closed down?
Yeah.
Now,
Johnny Hero?
Johnny Hero. Unfortunately for them, they made the mistake of calling this a boy's doll. So I guess needless to say, we know that things probably didn't work out that well for them.
Did Hasbro have a trademark on the name action figure?
I don't think so. They were probably trying to be fresh and ended up calling it a boy's doll, or they probably didn't want to call it an action hero to separate themselves from Mattel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the move didn't work. But in 1966, Mattel introduced astronaut figurines through their Major Mason line. And the suits that you could put on these figurines were based on actual NASA prototypes, and the figures were released alongside miniature vehicles and playsets. So
That sounds interesting. I'd
yeah,
never
so
heard of those.
I guess the 1960s, people weren't looking up to to made up heroes. They were looking up to actual astronauts and and actual Marines, soldiers, if you will.
Well, during that time, a lot of people that were ripping off GI Joe were literally like copying off like the exact body and like putting a GI Joe in a mold and passing the new toys off as their own. Uh, there was this famous like incident where GI Joe accidentally put a fingernail on the inside of the thumb,
Hmm.
and the people that would rip them off would copy that. So GI Joe Hasbro had an easy time of suing people for having ripped off their toy, including Mego, the company.
Oh yes, Mego was a big player in the 70s.
Including Mego had ripped them off, but and even included the inverted thumbnail in their action figure.
Well, in the Roaring 70s, Mego dominated the superhero market, and that lasted all the way to 1976 when they made one crucial mistake that we'll get to a little bit later. But it was during this time DC and Marvel figures boomed in popularity. I guess people forgot all about the war. Um they forgot about astronauts and all that, and they were into superheroes, much like people are today, right?
Also,
Um,
that's when that started.
yes, and in the 70s, there was an oil crisis, which saw restrictions in the availability of commodities, including raw materials that are used to make toys.
Yeah, the petrochemicals are used to make the plastic.
Correct. Enter Martin Abrams, the head of Mego. He decided to manufacture 8-inch figures, and he called the line the world's greatest superheroes. Now, Mego back then they had the rights to both DC and Marvel. It wasn't like today where one company has DC and one company has Marvel, and then at the end of the day Disney's gonna have everything. So 1972 saw the first wave of figures. They came with generic bodies, I guess with the inverted nails that you're talking about. And the only difference was the head.
Those?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the head, like the actual difference on the figure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the clothes were they were soft goods. And in this first wave, we had Batman, Superman, Aquaman, and Robin, all DC figures. 1973, we saw the second wave. This wave was a little bit shorter, but if you notice, these waves have a running theme. It was Spider-Man, Captain America, and Tarzan.
Was
You,
Tarzan from a comic?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it was from the stories. I don't know when the movie came out. Uh,
Okay, no, there's been many movies. Yeah,
but is Tarzan a Marvel property?
I don't know because much stuff did become Marvel property. I think Conan the Barbarian became Marvel eventually. It got bought out by Marvel.
Now, if you notice these waves, and if you go back and look at the list, I'm not going to go through each wave, right? But they never mixed DC and Marvel figures when they were making them. And this non-mixing of DC and Marvel continued until the fifth wave in 1976, where you had the Human Torch, Invisible Girl, Mr. Fantastic, The Thing, Thor, Conan, and Isis. I have no idea who Isis is, but that's the only DC character that was in this wave.
Was there any backlash to that?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think superheroes were as sacred back then as we are now, even though, well, no, the golden age of comics was what, the 40s?
I I don't know.
Yeah, I think the golden age of comics was the 40s, but still, people weren't, it's not like today where we nitpick at everything, you know?
Yeah.
Like the first thing I noticed
I
when I
don't know.
saw
That's
these
when they were
lines
starting to.
to nitpick.
Yeah, I think the Like, what were the first? When were the first like comic conventions? I know they were up there around the time with like the first Star Trek convention. So this might have been like prime era for them to start nitpicking.
Well, yeah, you're sort of right. 1964, the first official comic convention took place in New York City. New York City Comic Con 64.
Damn.
Yeah. Everything happens in New York first. Well, Migos' dominance lasted up to 1976, the late 70s. And it was in this era that figurines of film stars became popular. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Star Wars?
Yes, sir. All right, so Star Wars was one of the first film franchises to have its characters depicted in toy form. So I guess actors and stuff had figurines, but Star Wars was the first to have its characters from a movie made into
Really?
Yeah. So that big mistake that I was telling you about Mego, they could have dominated the 60s, but they passed on the rights. They were offered it first, and they passed. What a big mistake that was. It probably haunts them to this day.
Was somebody else? Did Hasbro pass on it?
I don't know. I don't know if they went to Hasbro.
Or they first went to Mego, then to...
I know Mego was the first thought. They were the first people they thought of. But in stepped this small company, which ended up landing on a fucking gold mine when they decided to produce an original line of figures from the 1977 film, then known as Star Wars. It was Kenner Toys.
Was the oil crisis still going on at this point?
Yeah, it was done by then. It ended in 1974. But I don't know. I guess they figured that it was cheaper to produce the toys in smaller scale, and they probably kept going. Or other companies wanted to make that their, like their stamp. Like, oh, they make 12-inch, so we'll make 3 3/4 inch, or we'll make 8-inch, and so and so.
Uh-huh.
Now, I don't recall when the toys were gonna be produced, if it was while they were filming or after they were filming, but I'm gonna assume it was while they were filming, because George Lucas was unwilling to provide them with character and vehicle designs because of fear that his ideas would be plagiarized by movie and TV competitors. And this and this put Mego, up against the wall. So this setback.
Oh, that's why they didn't
Yeah,
take it.
Yes. Not Mego, I'm sorry. Still thinking about Mego. This put Kenner's back against the wall.
Oh, okay.
And the setback, it caused them to not be able to keep up with the huge demand that followed after the film, because everybody wanted a piece of Star Wars and the Christmas season was coming up. So what did Kenner do?
That mail away cardboard thing?
Early bird certificate package.
Oh, okay.
Which was basically just a certificate that you could mail to Kenner, and you would redeem it for 4 Star Wars figurines.
Were those 4 all the ones that existed, or did you get to like choose from 4?
No, it was the 4 that existed. It was Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and R2. R2D2 for those that
Wow, that's very limited.
Right? So the box also contained a diorama display stand, stickers, and a Star Wars fan club membership card. Do you have a Star Wars membership card, George?
No.
How dare you call yourself a Star Wars fan then?
Is there still a Star Wars club?
I don't know. But the next person that starts, complaining about Star Wars or calls themselves an actual fan, I'm going to ask them, where's your Star Wars fan club membership card? Let me see it. If they don't have it, then, their arguments are mute.
We could probably make a replica of one.
Yeah, right. So these little figurines were 3 3/4 inch. That's that line that you're so obsessed with, starting to collect. And they became an industry standard. And the other difference that they had from the other ones, that instead of having interchangeable clothing, soft goods, the clothes they were molded on the figures.
You would think that it would have been the other way around, right?
Well,
I guess
maybe
not.
before.
Huh?
Maybe before the term action figure was coined, because like you said, if there were already toys for boys out there, then I'm pretty sure if there was a clown toy, it probably had the clown clothes painted on.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess we'll never know. Um, Now, by the time these four figures were available for direct sales in shops, because it wasn't stores back then, it was shops, there were 8 more figures available to purchase. So the other 8 figures were C-3PO, Darth Vader, there was a Stormtrooper, Old Man Obi-Wan Kenobi. Well, which other Obi-Wan can there be, right? Back then.
That time.
Hans.
Ghost Obi. Oh no, that was
No?
before.
Yeah. That was before Jedi. The Ghost Obi-Wan didn't show up until Jedi. The voice did, but
Oh, okay.
there was Han Solo, a Jawa, Sand People or Sand Person, and a Death Squad commander.
Which one's that one? A kind of stormtrooper?
No, I'm assuming it's. Do you remember when Darth Vader force choked somebody, a general or some shit like that?
Oh, okay.
I'm assuming it's one of them. Now, as we said, these were the first figures that were depictions of characters from a movie, but this was also the first film to successfully market toys based on a movie. So successful that George Lucas independently used the funds that he made from the action figures to finance the next 2 chapters, Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Wow.
Yeah.
Toy money is where it's at.
I'm telling you, we gotta stop doing podcasts and start making toys. Let's go rip off somebody. So between 1978 and 1985, 100 unique figures were produced. During which time,
How many?
More than 100 unique figures were produced between 1978 and 1985 of Star Wars.
How many of those were Luke's though?
Yeah, good question, because look at how many Lukes we have now. But during that time, more than 300 million Star Wars action figures were sold.
Holy crap.
Right? So I don't know. You could say that Star Wars started the collect them all era.
Do you know why the Star Wars action figures were 3 3/4 inch?
No. I assumed that it was because of the oil crisis.
Yeah, I'm sure that had something to do with it. They also wanted to, they couldn't build an X-wing that, in 12-inch scale, for example. That was another reason they wanted to include vehicles in the line. But when they were deciding that, the Kenner CEO told the designers, they were like, well, how big do you want Luke to be? Because they were gonna base like everyone else's height based on Luke, to make Chewbacca taller and so on. And what he did was stretched out his fingers, and he said like this big, and the toy designers brought a ruler and measured how big he said, and it was 3 3/4 inch.
Wow. So they measured his the space between his thumb and his index finger or middle finger,
Yeah.
whichever other finger it was that he was using.
Yeah,
up.
it's index finger, thumb and index.
That's insane.
Yeah, and it's funny because that basically set like the
standard.
For the next, I don't know, decade.
Wow, that simple act of, well, about this big.
Yeah, and the prototypes were that they grabbed some Fisher Price, basically 5-point of articulation action figures, and put Luke stuff on them and Chewbacca stuff on them.
Damn. I always assumed that it was like really well thought out, and they were really methodical about it, and it turns out it was a room like in one of those Simpsons episodes where I forget which episode it was, that they were trying to come up with something like, the Poochie. So a name like or a name like Poochie, and then when the executive walked out of the room, the rest of them just went, so we're good with Poochie.
Well, it was methodical in that they did, think about, well, we need vehicles, right? And that therefore the action figures can't be too big, but yeah, it
But
was just some guy stretched out his hand and said like that. Okay. And it's funny because it did like you no longer think of like 12-inch dolls as being action, like the GI Joe, like the original GI Joe.
hmm
Like you no longer, even though those were the first quote unquote action figures, you no longer think of them as that. You just think of them as like a doll.
Oh yeah, anything that's 12-inch to me is a doll.
Hot Toys dolls.
That's what they are. I mean, they're not action figures. They're hot.
Well, yeah, they have a like swappable clothes.
They're dolls.
Yeah, I was listening to this guy that was talking about the early bird certificate. He was talking about how he like went and got it and kept it in his attic and stuff. He said at the time when he got the certificate, like he had no idea how big these things were gonna be because he had assumed an action figure is like a 12-inch GI Joe.
Wow.
And he said basically now he acknowledges that Star Wars redefined what it meant to, like, what an action figure meant, like a plastic thing, a plastic smaller thing. And he's like back in my day a GI Joe was basically like a 12-inch doll. Then he like caught himself and said like, no, it was a toy. He's like, it's a man's toy. Not a doll. So yeah, even now, people think of those as like dolls.
Yeah, yeah. So Star Wars is the line that redefined toys. G.I. Joe started it, but Star Wars redefined everything it is. The collectability, the aftermarket pricing, almost everything. I mean, is Star Wars also the first line to do 6-inch?
I don't know. I would be really interested in knowing which was the first 6-inch line.
Because if you ask me right now, that's probably the perfect size for an action figure. I don't see how they can get better.
That's 6 inches a little too small for my preference, but that's what I collect since that's basically what is most abundant.
What size would you like? Do you want a 12-inch doll?
No, I think 12-inch would be too big.
So what are you thinking? 8-9-inch figure is where it should be?
Probably a 9-inch scale. I don't know what that would be. 9-inch.
How big are the Marvel Select?
I don't know. That's like 7 or 8-inch.
So you want them a little bigger than Marvel Select?
Yes.
Oh wow! To me, the Marvel Select is a little too big, except for certain figures that scale better with Marvel Legends.
Yeah, like McFarlane, like 7-inch ish scale. That's around 1/10. That's around 1/10 scale. Yeah, I'd want it something like 1/8. There you go. Yeah, that's 9-inch. 1/8 scale. It's a good compromise between 6-inch and I'm sorry, between 1/12, which is 6-inch, and 1/10, which is like 1/12. Sorry, 1/12 and 1/6.
So you think that's the way of the future? Eventually, toys will be 9-inch figures, and that's gonna be the standard.
I don't know if that's the way of the future, but that's what I would like. Cause like those the 12-inch, like the 1/6 scale like Hot Toys, like I think those are too big. Like I do want one at least, like eventually to have one of them, but I wouldn't like make my whole line that. Well, mostly because it's so fucking expensive, but
and the real estate it takes up.
Yeah, the real estate is the concern.
Now, after the 1970s in Star Wars, which also went into the 1980s, but the 1980s spawned all sorts of popular action figure lines, many based on cartoons, which was one of the largest marketing tools for toy companies.
Yeah, in the 80s, the advertising, the ability to advertise to kids was relaxed. The laws were loosened, and now you could make an entire commercial that is actually a cartoon, and then sell that to kids.
Wow. Now, some of the most successful lines of the 1980s were Masters of the Universe. G.I. Joe made a big comeback, the smaller scale. Thundercats, the Real Ghostbusters, and the Superpowers line. Do you know what the Superpowers line is?
No. What is that?
The Superpowers line was like Batman and Robin and Joker. It was DC.
A DC line?
Yeah. I'm not sure if there was a Marvel line. I don't think so. I think by this time they were already separate, but don't quote me on that. But the superpower lines that I've seen have always been DC, so I'm gonna go ahead and make that assumption. I actually own a superpowers action figure. It's Robin. It's got the get up from the comic book or from the 1960s Batman TV show.
Is it from the 80s?
Yes, it's from the 80s.
Oh, okay. It's not like a re-release or something?
No, it's beat up and all that, so I got it on the cheap. The card, it's a beat up, so I got it on the cheap.
Cool.
But yeah, I remember when I was a kid, in the late 80s, I loved Batman. So and Robin was my favorite character. So that's the one figure that I owned that I needed to go. The one figure that I owned that I needed to go back and buy as an adult to bring back those memories.
Oh, talking about the ripping off of the stuff. When they brought back G.I. Joe, when Hasbro brought back G.I. Joe, the pitch, the guy, in order to like prototype the new G.I. Joe figures, he went out and bought Mego 3 3/4 inch action figures and painted them green, and then like added like the little pouches and like grenades and stuff, and that's how G.I. Joe was born.
Wow. Now those G.I. Joe figures had awesome articulation, man. My oldest sibling used to collect them. He had a huge collection of G.I. Joes, and luckily for me, when I started getting, I don't know, the memories that I now have, when I was old enough to remember, he was sort of growing out of toys, so he would let me play with them all the time. And I wasn't a G.I. Joe fan, so like I don't know about much. I know Cobra, I know a couple of characters, but man, the articulation on those toys to this day, I say, is the best.
It's pretty good. I wonder why Kenner didn't rip it off. Well, I'm pretty sure they improved on the Mego articulation, but they basically ripped it off of Mego. Why didn't Kenner do that for the Star Wars?
I don't know. Maybe they were. Maybe by this time the lawsuits were plentiful. Now, early in the early part of the decade, Japanese robot anime was very popular. But I guess it's been always really popular since we talked about how they turned that G.I. Joe into a cyborg. Gundam was around back then. I didn't know Gundam was that old. I thought Gundam was like a 90s thing. Now they encourage.
Yeah, it was it's like a mid to late 80s when it started, right?
Yeah, mid to late 80s, and that encouraged the Microman line to be invented as micro robots. This led to the Micro Change line of toys, which are objects that could transform into robots. And in 1984, Hasbro licensed Micro Change and the Diaclone Transforming Cars line and combined them to create their baby.
Transformers.
Well, actually, this studying up on the history of action figures has made me realize my mistake. Transformers isn't their baby. G.I. Joe is.
Yeah, right? That G.I. Joe made them?
Yeah,
made them who they are, basically?
Yeah. But I don't know. I guess Transformers must be up there too, because I think Transformers was their first cartoon that then had figures. So they marketed it to you first and then made the action figures, or then released the action figures per se.
Yeah. Well, I guess G.I. Joe was before the 80s, but because the 60s G.I. Joe didn't have that, but they did for the 80s when first they marketed the comic book where they invented all the Cobra stuff. I guess it was that would go on to become the cartoon.
Makes sense. Now, also in 1984, Titan Sports, which is the parent company of WWF, they contracted LJN to produce the first wrestling figures, which were made of solid rubber, and they were actually very accurate to the appearances of their real life counterparts, which was good for toys back then because they're based on real people. They were 8 inches tall and they had no articulation. They were just these big rubber dolls. I don't know if you've ever seen them, and the appeal of them was that you could slam them on the floor and they would bounce
They would
back
break.
up. Yeah, they're not gonna break, and they're wrestling toys.
Yeah.
Yeah, and LJN had success with this until 1989, when unfortunately they had to close their doors. Now those LJNs are really expensive if you try to get them now in mint condition.
Damn.
I mean, to find them in mint condition is hard in itself, but
Yeah, maybe that rubber like degrades and stuff, right?
oh, very easily. I had a few of them, and yeah, the painting would rub off immediately.
Oh, I heard of the old GI Joes in their like from the 80s, like still sealed in their packages. The rubber in the rubber band that's in the articulation
Mm-hmm.
becomes brittle, and it and then
Snap.
the Joe breaks off. It falls inside the card back, like without you even having opened it.
Well, there's the answer to your question as to why they didn't rip off this articulation style.
Were they that forward thinking? They're like, no, these are gonna become collectibles forever.
Well, I mean, it's not so much that you have to be uh, forward thinking. Maybe, somebody at the other company had a kid that liked playing with the GI Joes, and they noticed that the rubber would snap eventually if you were too rough with them. And then you could just start putting two and two together and say, oh, that's probably not the best idea. And on top of that, in time, it might become, brittle and break off.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe, I don't know. But as the 1980s were ending, more and more collectors started to surface, buying up toys to keep in their original packaging for display purposes. I don't know. I guess the 80s couldn't be all good, right?
The rise of the inbox collector.
The rise of the empire. Now, this led to flooding the action figure market.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
So did was there like a boom and crash in the action figure market?
there was. Because as the 1980s were ending and those glorious, glorious, beautiful 1990s started, uh, lines like the highly popular Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they were produced in such high quantities that the value of the figures would never be more than a few dollars.
Oh wow. This is around the time too when the comics crash happened. I think that
Oh,
might have been in the early 90s. Where also people started like, "Oh, we can collect these, you know." There was a bunch of stories, on the news about, this person found a comic in their attic and it's worth, thousands of dollars. So people started saving all the comics they could, which led to them printing, but the comics would never go up in value.
because they were so widely available.
Yeah.
Now, in the 1990s, our favorite toy company got the license to those. When LJN closed its doors, Hasbro got the WWF contract, and they began producing figures in 1990. Now, these were manufactured from plastic instead of the rubber. They weren't fully articulated; like you can move the head and the waist and sometimes the arms, and they didn't have full articulation because like a bunch of them had various spring-loaded action features, like punches and clotheslines, and like some you would they had this little lever on the back that you would on their backs that you would push down, and then they would spring up and jump. Now, something I learned from another podcast, the Wrestling Figure podcast, the Major Wrestling Figure podcast. Which, if you ever have time, I think you should go listen to it. Mostly, all they talk about is wrestling figures, but it's nice seeing that two other grown ass men that are professional wrestlers love collecting toys so much that they also dedicate time to a podcast and love talking about it. But well, I learned from them that when Hasbro or toy companies really, when they're gonna produce an action figure, they first make a mock-up two-up. They're called two-ups, which are double in size. Like, to get like the sculpting and what the figure's gonna look like. And I think when back in the 80s when LJN was gonna pitch the figures to Vince McMahon, he liked the big ones so much that they ended up making those. So the two ups came to be the figures that we actually got. They were originally meant to be smaller and articulated.
What was how tall were they?
I think I think I said they were 8 inches tall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were 8 inches tall.
And that was twice the size of what they were gonna be?
Yeah. Yeah. Now this is where Hasbro got them, and they made because their toy line is 4 inches tall. The figures that I still have to this day.
Nice.
Yes, I loved those figures, man. They were such a big part of my childhood. Like some of the best times I remember playing with toys was with those WWF Hasbros. Those and the Uncanny X-Men line from Toy Biz. You remember the Toy Biz figures from X-Men?
Yes, those I do remember. I remember being at your house playing with them. Those are the ones you're talking about, right?
Yes, those are the ones I'm talking about.
With the light up, with the Cyclops with the light up eyes.
Light up eyes. Storm had a light up chest, and they also came with like action features, like they would kick, or you would wind their hand back and push the lever, and they would punch. And I think Magneto had that. The first Magneto had that. Do you remember the caps? The guns with caps.
Yeah.
So I had something similar where in the back you would move a wheel and it would spark up and you could see the sparks coming from his chest.
Oh, that's cool. I don't remember that.
Yeah, those that line and the WWE.
Oh, Wolverine had like retractable claws, right?
Yes, the first Wolverine had retractable claws, and it didn't have you couldn't bend its elbows because of this.
Because of that?
Yeah.
That's funny because when you do like if you sit down and like well, definitely in the movie, like how long those claws are, you wouldn't be able to bend your wrist. Like they'd be far up in there, yeah. Those claws grow when they're outside of Wolverine's body.
I wonder if that's why Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't like the X-Men movies. Disclaimer, I don't know if Neil deGrasse Tyson likes or dislikes the X-Men movies.
I bet you he'd have something to complain about them.
Oh, the glorious, glorious 90s. In 1997, Toy Fair magazine would become popular with older collectors. And, this is where you could get your news and your news of upcoming figures. And, you could look at the figures that were out there while at the same time embracing nostalgia. And also in the 90s, with the gaining popularity of the internet, websites such as Toy News International would provide info on upcoming collectibles. The 90s gave us a bunch of good things, man. It gave us the WWF figures. It gave us the
Simpsons.
The Simpsons. Oh, man, you can't beat the 90s. I don't care what anybody says. You know what else the 90s gave us? Glow-in-the-dark action figures and accessories.
There wasn't any before that?
Unless that G.I. Joe you were talking about, that Cyborg was glow-in-the-dark. I don't think so.
No, I think it was like light up.
Yeah, no.
Glow-in-the-dark.
The 90s gave us the glow-in-the-dark with lines such as Toxic Crusaders and Swamp Thing. Did you ever own a Toxic Crusader or a Swamp Thing?
No, but I do remember watching that movie.
Swamp Thing?
Oh, no, wait. Not Toxic Avenger. No?
Yeah, Toxic Avenger. That's different.
That's different from Toxic Crusader?
I don't know. I remember the cartoons.
Hold on. Let me look it up. I think Toxic Crusader might have been the cartoon.
Yes, Toxic Crusaders was definitely the cartoon. I know this because I had figures.
Yeah. Toxic Crusaders was the cartoon.
And it's not the same thing as the Toxic Avenger.
Toxic Avenger was the movie. Toxic Crusaders was the spin-off cartoon.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Oh, do you have you ever seen any of the Troma Studio movies?
No.
No? Have
No.
you ever heard of that?
No. I've never heard that word before in my life.
Oh, they made a bunch of that kind of movie, like scary movies or like gory movies. That's where James Gunn came out of for making those movies.
Hmm.
Have you ever heard of Tromeo and Juliet?
No.
No?
No.
That's the other one I remember off the top of my head they're pretty good, dude. You should watch them.
I am. Send me.
They're really like they're really cheaply made, but they're funny and they're gory.
Send me a reminder. Send me a message when you can of what it's called again, and I'll look it up and start looking for movies.
All right.
Now, in 1997, Toy Biz, they manufactured the Storm action figure, the one we were talking about, right? With the light up. Not as a female character, she was really fierce, and she had these. Her clothing was colored on, and it was really tight, and the figure was really sexualized, apparently. So much so that in 1999, a study found that figures had grown more muscular, some exceeding the muscularity of even the world's largest bodybuilders.
Oh, that's when you got was it the time too when with the muscular Star Wars figures?
The Power of the Force line, exactly. Yes, I had that as a side note here. Power of the Force, anyone? They were, and a bunch of people thought that these changes contributed to the body
image issues.
Yeah, to body image disorders in both sexes.
Do you remember that the Simpsons episode where Lisa designs a Malibu Stacy, or where Lisa designs her own doll?
Lisa Lionheart.
Yeah. So it turns out that do you remember when Malibu Stacy, when Lisa got mad that Malibu Stacy was saying a bunch of sexist things?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just a girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apparently that's a reference to a controversy in the early 90s of the first, I think it was the first Talking Barbie would say stuff like that. Would say stuff like, let's go shopping. And the one that I guess made most people mad, or the people that were complaining mad, was her saying that something about math, complaining about math. Right? And there was a lot of reference to that in that episode. Do you remember when Lisa sees the girls seeing what Malibu Stacy's saying, and one of them says, one of the Malibu Stacy says, anybody call for a web slinger or something like that?
Yes.
Or my Spidey sense is tingling. Yeah. Anyone call for a web slinger?
Yeah. She said, mine's is broken, the girl, and she pulled the string, and it was saying Spider-Man stuff. Yeah.
Apparently that's a reference to, there was this group of, have you ever heard of the Yes Men?
No.
No? Okay, so the Yes Men go, like, on TV. Well, the most famous thing that they did, they pretended to go onto the BBC. No, they didn't pretend to go on to the BBC. One of them pretended to be like the CEO of a chemical company. I think it was a Dow chemical company.
Mm-hmm.
And then he took responsibility for a chemical spill. He was saying that they were gonna pay out money to the victims of the chemical spill.
Mm-hmm.
I forget where this chemical spill was. Probably like India or Bangladesh. Damn, I might be way off. But he took responsibility for it. This guy who has no affiliation. The BBC just thought it was this guy, right? And he tanked their stock by like $1 billion.
Damn.
Okay, so this group of people back in the 90s,
Hmm.
uh, they I think either one of them or both of them, the Yes Men, were involved in this, in something called the Barbie Liberation Organization. Oh, they went up and bought up a bunch of the talking. It was called Teen Talk Barbie. They bought up a whole bunch of them, and they bought up a whole bunch of talking GI Joes, and they switched the voices, like the
the,
little
vo-
circuit board inside.
the voice box.
Yeah, they switched them so that the Barbie would say GI Joe things, and the GI Joe would say Barbie things.
Wow.
And they returned them to stores. At first, I thought they got their money back, like they just swapped like an old school swap, like
Uh-huh.
a Build-A-Figure swap or something. But though apparently they just returned them, like they just lost their money on it, I guess.
They
Bought the
just went
figures,
and put the figures back.
put the figures back in the store. Yeah.
And then when little girls and little boys would buy their GI Joes and Barbies, they would. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah. But it's not clear. Because of the nature of that kind of their kind of group that does media spectacles, to like basically, like, I don't know, parody the news, or like show how, I don't know, I guess like teach a lesson or whatever, right? About the news, like the gullibility of the news, or like how much like the news is like influencing people
Hmm.
and stuff. It's not entirely clear how much of that was real, how many Barbies they actually bought, because the news reported that somewhere like around 300 to 500 of those swapped GI Joes and Barbies. But it might have been because they sent a video that of them saying they were going to do this to a whole bunch of news organizations, and some of them picked up on it. They're like, "Oh, look at what this crazy group is doing," right? Uh, oh, apparently it was like them like making fun of that Barbie was saying sexist things, right? So then they would switch the Barbie, and now the Barbie would be saying like things like "vengeance is mine" or stuff that the GI Joe would say, and then the GI Joe would be saying things like you know, let's go to the beach.
Wow. Something that I just, you would overlook is just, a gag on The Simpsons.
Yeah,
It goes to
yeah.
show you how deep some of this shit is written, man.
Yeah, and especially since we were kids back then, we didn't know like what the hell was going on,
We just thought
right?
it was a defective toy and it was funny.
Yeah. And apparently, I don't know, they might have recruited people, kids, to go to the news and tell them they got a, or these kids might have been kids that bought it. But there was also they also interviewed kids uh with the you should watch these interviews. They're pretty funny.
I'm gonna
Uh
look that up tonight.
they interviewed the kids too, and one of the girls was like, I was disturbed by what the Barbie was saying, but then I also laughed. And one of the kids that got the GI Joe with the switched Barbie, he was talking about how initially they did think it was a factory mistake. I think until the dad opened it up, and they did see that that the GI Joe was like cut into, and then the sister, she said something along the lines of, "Damn, I forgot," but it was funny. She said something along the lines of like, uh, "I guess it is okay if GI Joe wants to go shopping," or something like.
Is ain't nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So I guess they did teach their lesson that they were aiming to. Oh, so in the early 90s, when Hasbro bought Kenner, Kenner originally had a really good deal. Well, good for them. Had a really good deal with Lucas. They got a chunk of the profit, because I think Kenner was the last toy company that Lucas went to. to make Star Wars.
Right.
So if they had rejected him, they like Lucas would have been out of luck. So Kenner had a pretty nice slice of the profit, and but part of the deal was that if Kenner wanted to, Kenner could keep the license forever, was part of the deal. But they had to at least make $10,000 worth of like royalties for Lucas, and that wasn't a problem throughout like the 85 when Return of the Jedi came out, but it did start becoming a problem after that. But they still kept paying it. But after Hasbro bought Kenner, Hasbro was like, nope, like we're not paying it anymore. So Hasbro lost the Star Wars license. Did you know that?
No.
And then in 90, like the mid to late 90s, when they started making the prequels and the specialized editions, or what were they called?
Yeah, the special editions.
Yeah, the special editions. And they started making more Star Wars shit. Hasbro had to pay a lot of money to get Star Wars, the Star Wars license they didn't care about in the early 90s back.
Well, I mean, that's because after Jedi, there was a big gap there where there was no Star Wars. It wasn't like now where you would get cartoons and Disney's producing a new Star Wars movie every 3 months, and we didn't have that. So yeah, I could see why sales would start falling off, and maybe Hasbro thinking, no, this line's dead, it's not going to go anywhere anymore. And there you go. And it made its comeback. They had to end up paying more just to get that license back. That's crazy.
Yeah, they would have probably paid the $10K a month would probably. I'm sorry, a month. Wait, was it a month or was it a year? No, I think it was per year. The 10,000 a year would have been chump change for compared to the money that they had to end up paying later on.
And this is the same line that had the bulked out Star Wars figures, right? The Power of the Force.
Yeah, I think those were the first Hasbro line.
I remember buying a few of those.
Oh yeah?
I wanted to start Star Wars collection. Like me and Star Wars collecting, it kind of goes, it comes and goes. And that's the first time I remember I was like, okay, I'm gonna start collecting Star Wars, and I bought a whole bunch of them. I was a little older. I believe I was in high school or about to enter high school, and I bought some, and then it just started like, it kind of died out. I was busy being a teenager, so I believe I gave most of them to my nephew, or I sold them off. And then I tried again when the episode 1 came out and all the figures started releasing. The Darth Maul that I have is one of them. I was going to start collecting them again, and then I was like, nah. I eventually stopped. And then with Black Series, I remember buying a couple of Black Series, but then after I bought like 3 or 4, I was considering selling them again. I was like, I'm not going to really start collecting Star Wars, and I was going to sell them
Really?
off. Yeah. And now here we are. It's probably one of my favorite lines now to collect. I probably could have had so many more Star Wars figures if I had just stayed consistent with it. Probably not Black Series, because that year that I spent collecting Marvel Legends, there was nothing gonna be stopping me, because there was just too many X-Men figures coming out, and too many Marvel Legends that I really wanted.
You would have been a 3 3/4 collector.
Oh
if
yeah,
you had kept it up.
Yeah, if I had never stopped, and I would have so many. I mean, yeah, I would have a lot, not compared to what others have, but if I had just kept collecting from when the Power of the Force came out, yeah, I would have Power of the Force and those other lines. I would probably have a lot of figures.
So you don't regret that, right? Since you don't like 3 3/4.
It's not that I don't like 3 3/4. What turns me off to 3 3/4 is that there's too much. I mean, if I was a 3 3/4 inch Star Wars collector, I probably wouldn't have room in my budget or in my house to collect anything else.
Oh, okay.
That's my issue. I don't have any problems. I know I like to throw jabs at 3 3/4 inch and inbox collectors. I also don't have a problem with inbox collectors. I mean,
as long as they stay in their lane.
Yeah, as long as they stay in their lane. I mean, it's weird, but But I have no issues with these two. Now, Transformers collectors, different story. I don't want to get into that. But those other two lines, no. It's mostly because, and also inbox collecting to me is not pointless because I like the way a lot of the figures do look in their box, but I have way more real estate opening them up and displaying them. I have a shelf full of Marvel Legends. How many figures would I actually be able to fit on that shelf if I had kept them in the box?
True.
We can't come out of the 90s without mentioning the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers line, which was it's Hasbro, correct?
It's Hasbro now. I think it was Bandai back then.
It was Bandai. You're right. Are you sure it wasn't Toy Biz?
No, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure it was Bandai because they had all the ready-made toys for the Super Sentai. What was it called? The show that Power Rangers is cut from.
Yeah.
Repurposed from.
Yeah, the Super Sentai Super Happy Hour. I don't know, whatever it was called. um, so these Power Rangers figures, they just blew up in the 90s, and I remember having the only 90s Power Rangers figures I had were the head flip ones, the morphing ones.
Yeah, the ones with the small heads and giant chests.
Yes, those are the ones. And I remember I had all of them. When I say all of them, I mean I had all the Rangers. I didn't have any bad guys, but I was able to get all of the Rangers.
Oh, okay. I think I just had the Green Ranger for that line.
Yeah, and the Green Ranger's his what is it called? His chest plate would you'd have to connect it in two pieces.
Oh, because of the shield thing?
Yeah, because you wouldn't be able to morph unless,
oh, okay.
With that shield in the way, because I guess they just really cheaped out and didn't want to just sculpt part of that chest or have the chest plate sculpted on so that you can morph into the Green Ranger. Probably would have made a little more sense.
I remember that's like the first time thinking about like articulation and stuff on the toys, because I remember thinking, well, I'd rather much have two Power Rangers, one without the helmet and one with the helmet, than like the Switch gimmick. What did you think about them? You liked them?
At the time, I loved them, even though I was fully aware of their deficiencies, articulation-wise. But I was so into Power Rangers at the time that I gobbled them up. But there were other Power Ranger figures that I didn't get. One thing about that line, the Flip Morphin line, is you could their weapons, you could connect them into to make that giant weapon that the Rangers would sometimes use on the TV show.
Did that have a name, that weapon? I assume it has a name.
I'm
don't
sure
remember.
It does. Yeah, I'm sure it does, but I also don't remember.
Did you ever have any of the transforming and like connecting Zords?
No, I never had a Zord.
I didn't either, and one of my cousins did, and I loved that thing.
What did he have? Or she?
He had the Dragon Zord and the Ninja Zord.
Oh, the Ninja Zord. I forgot all about the Ninja figures. I take back what I said earlier. I had a few of the Ninja ones.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Ninja Zord is my favorite of the Zords. Well, the Ninjas are the ones I liked of the Power Rangers, period.
I don't remember the Ninja ones too much. I remember I had them because I liked the look of them.
The in their ninja outfit?
Yes, in the ninja outfit.
Oh, okay. They're like half morphed state. I don't know what to refer to it as.
Yeah. I don't know what they called it, but yeah, like I said, I didn't really watch. I wasn't watching Power Rangers at the time. In fact, I don't know if it's from a movie or from the show, but I had the White Ranger. I know that for a fact, and probably the red one.
Okay. Oh, I did have. Well, it doesn't count as a transforming one, but I did have this. Well, it belonged to Lord Zed, the a Zord called Serpentera.
Hmm.
You don't remember it, or you didn't watch it at that point?
No, I can tell you when I stopped watching Power Rangers. I stopped watching it. Do you remember when, to go a little off track here, but do you remember when they had that special when they introduced Lord Zed? I think it was like on a Saturday.
I don't remember that it was a special, but I do remember that there was a shift between, Rita and Lord Zed.
It happened on a Saturday, and there was Power Rangers. I remember because there was Power Rangers on TV, new Power Rangers, and they introduced Lord Zed. I stopped watching basically there, mostly because of my age. I was growing out of it, and that's when I stopped.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, but they had all sorts of, they also had the figures that had the morphed ones with the helmet that wasn't removable, and they had the power coin image on their chests, and they had role playing games, not role playing games, role playing toys. Uh, Power Rangers was just everywhere,
Yep.
and that to me is where the '90s ended, basically, because like I said, I was starting to grow out of childish things that I eventually grew back into. But yeah, I was entering a different point in my life there, and I stopped watching and I stopped buying toys. So yeah, you could say that the Power Rangers toys were probably the last line that I collected.
uh, what about the X-Men toys?
Those were before,
That
because
was before Power Rangers?
well, no, before I got into Power Rangers, because although Power Rangers came out in '93, I didn't really get into them until '94, '95 is when I started getting into them. And before that, I had already started collecting the X-Men figures, the Toy Biz ones.
Oh, okay.
That's why I only had that set of Power Rangers, because that's like the last time I was actually into buying toys, like new toys. And I remember getting the Ninja ones just because they looked cool, but I didn't really like play with them much.
Oh, okay.
That and the McDonald's Power Rangers Happy Meal figures. I don't know if you remember them. There were these really small figures, and I think they're 3 inch or 3 3/4 inch.
Did they have like vehicles?
Yes, they came in vehicles.
Yeah, I think I remember those.
That I also had all of them. In fact, I remember that I was missing only the Pink Ranger. I had collected all of them except the Pink Ranger, and it was on my birthday that my oldest brother, took me out, and we went to a whole bunch of McDonald's looking for that Pink Ranger. And I remember that day was the day the heat wave started.
Yeah, the 95 heat wave?
Was it 95 or 96?
I don't know, somewhere around there. But yeah.
It was either 95 or 96, yeah. That it
When
started on my birthday that day, and I remember because I was out looking for the Power Ranger, for the pink Power Ranger, thinking, man, it's super hot. And then the heat just never went away.
Yeah, so global warming started on your birthday.
Yeah, basically.
I'm pretty sure we've had heat waves that bad, but it was like the first heat wave, I guess, where a lot of people died.
Yeah, a lot of people died, man. I remember walking around the block at night. We would take walks, and
It was hot at night.
it was super hot at night. You had people sleeping out in their front porches.
Damn.
Yeah, and I don't remember if it was the first or second day of the heat wave, because back then my family, we didn't have an air conditioner.
Oh.
We bought an air conditioner, and then that night the whole block went. We had a blackout for like 3 days.
Oh man, that's crazy.
Yeah, I'll never forget that summer. I don't remember the year, but I'll never forget that summer.
That was our coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, I'll take that one over what the hell is going on right now
Well,
any day, though.
yeah, obviously. There were a lot less people dead.
And you knew that eventually it's going to end because the summer has to end.
True.
Even if we put up with 2 months of this shit, September would come and it would start to cool off. But yeah, I remember we ended up taking a lot of walks to our local Jewel Osco and other
Back
establishments
when they
that
had
had.
a better selection of toys.
Yes, they did. Jewel
They
Osco
do
really
now.
fell off. Yeah. But yeah, that's how we cooled off that summer, and that's my that's probably my last action figure collecting story. I'm pretty sure that's what probably turned me off from collecting. And so yeah, from there we transition into the 2000s, and then the 2000s is when the adult collector market expanded with companies like McFarlane Toys or Palisades and NECA really cashing in, and I guess this is when they started figuring, you know what, these guys never let go of their childhood, and we can cash in on that.
Yeah, probably when like the 80s, people that were kids in the 80s probably got old enough to have like disposable income.
Yes, yes, because I am one of those. I'm still a part of that where 80s, 90s, we didn't really have we couldn't get every figure we wanted. And so when we got a little older, we were able to spend more money and we would go out and buy them. And the toys just honestly, they got better. I mean, for sentimental reasons, I'll always love those old 90s, 80s toys, but man, these companies now are really knocking it out of the park. Especially with like McFarlane. Have you seen the McFarlane sports figurines, the statues? And they're also doing the DC line. You were telling me something about the latest DC line.
Oh, it looks really good. It makes me want to collect the DC line, even though I'm not that like, even though I don't like DC that much as like Legends and stuff, but they're just so good that I want to get them.
Yeah, I when you told me about it, I've seen the DC figures. They look nice. I've wanted to collect them, but I've had self control. But now that you told me about that Wonder Woman, the latest Wonder Woman, I don't know, pictures or wherever you've seen it, that
Reviews?
yes, that she looks like Gal Gadot, or I don't know how to pronounce her name. That
Yeah.
the likeness is so spot on. I think I'm gonna have to, at the very least, I'm gonna have to get the Trinity, which is Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman.
Yeah, although I was assuming that the scaling is off on that but still. Um do you think we'll ever look back on the toys of today and be like, "Wow, these were really crappy compared to, the toys of tomorrow?"
Possibly if we make it to tomorrow.
Right.
Unless what's
Cuz
happening in the world right now is going to eventually be the collapse of a lot of things. And hopefully not, but you never know. Toys might have to take a back seat to a lot of people. And, these companies, if they're not making money, will eventually have to shut their doors, which would be sad, but I hope not because I think we're experiencing some of the best times to be a toy collector. These figures are getting they're so much better.
yeah, I well, I never really thought about like I don't know, I guess I never really forgot how crappy, quote unquote, the toys of the 90s were. Uh but like you and Gainer, like when you say like, "Oh, like you like looked back at the toy you had and like you used to think that that was like a great toy back then and now it's not." Like I wonder if we're going to have that kind of feeling towards today's toys.
Probably not
No?
because we're collecting them as adults. And when I look at those toys, even though they're crappy, I say they're such great toys, but because of the nostalgia that it brings. The I'm sure I'll be nostalgic for this point in my life at some point, you know, but for different reasons. When I look back at those old Toy Biz ones and the Mattels and the Hasbros, what the beauty I see in them is it takes me back to when I was a child and I would actually play with them because I buy figures, but I don't know, like I don't play with them. I display them unless you want to count taking them to take pictures.
Yeah, I was going to say what counts as playing today is like posing them for pictures and stuff.
Yeah, that's the playing I'm doing. I'm not playing like there's no imagination really. Well, yeah, there's some imagination with the pictures, but I'm
Yeah,
not like Doc Ock isn't fighting Spider-Man or I don't have the Fantastic Four fighting Doctor Doom, and you know, and I'm telling you, when I used to play with my Hasbro's, with my WWE figures, like I couldn't play with somebody else. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I had my matches all planned out in my head. There were certain spots they were gonna do. You know, I had the finish in my head. I had everything. You know, so
Yeah.
yeah, I couldn't play with other kids like that. So, and I'm not doing that with these figures now. I open them, I move them around. You know, I might review them, and then they go on a shelf, and they will only come down if I'm gonna go take a picture of them.
So you didn't have when we would fight the wrestlers versus the X-Men, you didn't have the match planned out? That one just evolved organically.
Yeah, that was organic. That was organic. But I tried many a time to play with other friends with the wrestlers, but they would just like bang the wrestlers together, and I'd be like, "What are you doing? What are you doing, man?"
You're staging a whole story here.
Yeah. Gee. Which brings me back to what we were talking about earlier when I mentioned the Major Wrestling Figure podcast. One of the hosts on there said the exact same. They were talking about it. He was saying that he couldn't play with other kids because he had his matches all planned out and all that shit. And it made me laugh because it's the exact same thing I was doing. But yeah, and you know, these new figures now in the 2000s. I'm not too familiar with the Palisades figures. I don't know what they are, but the NECA figures, they're horror movie characters. They just keep getting better and better, and they're bringing back some of the cloth goods, like the clothing, like the Ultimate line. I have one of them, the Pennywise Ultimate, and the Annabelle. Yeah, but these adult oriented figure lines, they they're more expensive, and sometimes they're exclusive to specialty stores rather than mass retail. Or some of them will be available through mail or, you know, Comic-Con exclusives. And that doesn't just go for NECA. That also goes for these Marvel Legends and Star Wars The Black Series. And what I don't like about this is that having these figures be, you know, mail-in and Comic-Con exclusives is that it increases the aftermarket value of them.
Yeah. Do your kids they had like wrestling figures, right? Like Legends. Like your kid had some Legends?
Yeah, my son has Legends. I've bought him WWE figures.
What does he think of the adult lines versus like the kid lines? Does he have an opinion on that?
He doesn't like any lines. He likes certain characters, and I'll get him the figures, but he doesn't really play with them. Like, I don't know if it's just my kids, but they don't play. They're not into playing with toys. I don't know if it's a lack of imagination or I don't know. They're more into playing video games or doing TikToks and you know, social media and all that shit. They don't really play with toys. And toy companies know this. They know that it's the adult that's going out there and collecting them. And I think that's why we see less figures now. I remember when I was a kid, there were figures that were hard to get, but you see that so much more now. And I think I think it's because these toy companies know that it's us as adults going out there and collecting them, and we're more willing to spend the extra money for them.
I don't know. My niece, she still plays with toys a lot. I mean, I'm not like you're there and you're like seeing them like what they do all day, because she does spend a lot of time like playing video games and stuff. But she seems to like Lego a lot. I don't know if she ever plays like with the dolls and stuff that she has. Like I don't know how much of that because she's on like video games so much, right? I don't know how much time the video game eats versus like actually playing with toys. If she ever does that, you know.
Versus using your imagination.
Yeah.
It's so she probably has fun building it, and then that's probably, you know.
Yeah, I kind of don't like that because she does, it does seem like she has fun building the Legos, but yeah, I don't know if she ever like keeps the Legos and then plays with the Legos.
Yeah.
Because it does seem like the most important part for her of the Legos is the building and not, and I'm actually the opposite way. For me, it was the playing and not the building.
I'm pretty sure that for most people our age or in our age group, the most important part was always the playing, more than the. But yeah, it's weird. Like if I ever hear my son actually playing with his WWE figures, it's like, oh geez, he's playing with them, and then you go take a look at what he's doing, and then you're like, no, 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 you're doing it wrong, man. You're doing it wrong.
You need to pre-plan out the whole story.
Yes, he's got your match has no structure, son. You got to tell a story here.
The audience would be bored during this point of the match.
They'd be going through to a bathroom break or to go buy snacks. Come on now. You got to keep them engaged. But yeah, and from the 2000s to now, the lines that have exploded are Marvel Legends, Black Series. Those are the ones that you and I collect. The Transformers, I guess, never really went away. They just keep evolving and evolving, and I see a lot of people still collecting a lot of Transformers. The new WWE figures with the elites, with the articulation on them, they're sculpted beautifully, and it just keeps getting better and better. For example, the face scanning technology that we have now. I mean, could you have ever imagined that when you were a kid? I mean, I know we wanted it. We probably thought like, oh man, I wish this figure looked more.
Yes.
Like
we theorized that there could be such a thing, but we never saw it.
Yeah. And here we are today with, like I said, we're probably in the best time right now to be a toy collector.
Yeah, I would say so.
And all this thanks to one man. Well, not one man, one line. All this thanks to G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe. And to, I guess, because of that, through extension, to Barbie.
Yes, thank you to Barbie. But according to a poll conducted by the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, G.I. Joe was voted the most popular toy of the last century.
Wow.
Yeah. So much so that G.I. Joe was inducted into the Toy Hall of Fame in 2004.
I wonder because we focused mostly like I guess 60s this onward. I wonder what the more popular toys were before that.
Are you promising, or are you hinting or suggesting that we should maybe do an episode on that?
Yes, because I'm interested in we because mostly focusing on like action figures this onward. It makes me think like what came before that,
Tinker Toys.
What is that?
I don't know, but I hear the phrase used a lot, and I think they're mostly like wind-up toys and shit.
Oh, okay. I know Hasbro before G.I. Joe they made the Mr. Potato Head, but not like we know him now, but like actual like eyes and ears that you'd stick on a real potato. That was like their big seller pre G.I. Joe.
Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of toys that were out before. I mean, you had to keep your kids entertained with something. And yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We should talk about that one day. We should do some research and talk about the toys before the 60s. Look up when the first toy was made and go from there.
Like in Mesopotamia? Like the toys of...
Yeah, the first recorded actual toy.
The first time a kid picked up like a rock and said, this is something that is not a rock.
Yeah, so George, who would you say are the big players in today's world of toys?
Like in terms of companies or like lines?
Companies and lines. But I guess they would go hand in hand.
Yeah, I guess Hasbro is the biggest toy company.
Yeah, I would also say Hasbro. Hasbro is probably the Disney of the toy world.
One would think Disney would be the Disney of the toy world.
Give it time. Give it time.
Yeah, that's why they shouldn't allow like Hasbro to be in the movie producing business. In the toy commercial producing business.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be probably not the best idea if Disney ever acquired Hasbro or
I wonder how because we know that Disney's like the biggest like I don't know like in terms of like movie and media, one of the biggest companies, but I don't know like relative to Hasbro how big they are, because Hasbro's big in toys, Disney's big in movies. I wonder how if that's even like possible. Or if
yeah.
it's more possible for Hasbro to buy Disney.
No, no.
I don't think so either,
I
actually.
don't think so at all. I mean, there's no Hasbro World or Hasbro Land out there that's generating millions of dollars.
True, but the action figures of the of the movies make more than the freaking movies.
Yeah, but how much of that do they have to give to Disney?
Oh, true.
You know. So we hope you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane. Hopefully, it was a little bit informative for you all. I know we had fun recording this episode and looking up as much information as we can on action figures and going off on tangents that are being edited out. But I mean, this episode would probably be 2-3 hours long if we didn't edit out a bunch of the stuff we talked about. But yeah, if you enjoy what you heard, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, to Hasbro's Toy Hunts. Tell your friends, tell your family about the podcast. Share it. Give us a rating and a review on iTunes or on Spreaker or on Google or whatever platform you're using to listen to the show. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at 2toyhunts. And on Instagram, you can find some of the pictures that we take of action figures at geo_synchronicity. And until next time, George, this is the way.